Estes. And he's, mashallah, a little bit younger than Sheikh Yusuf, or maybe about 20 years younger, but still, they think he looks like him. And every time I travel somewhere, people see me and say, mashallah, mashallah, AbdurRaheem Green. Huh? So we're here tonight to show that there's two of us and that we are different, not the same, alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. Brothers in Islam with the same name, alhamdulillah. As we start tonight, we're talking about the time which was before the prophethood. And I want to mention, before I turn over to Shk AbdurRaheem, two important principles. And that is, first of all, what Imam Malik, rahimahullah ta'ala, used to say, talking about rectifying and fixing the affairs of this ummah. Because we always see now people are complaining, how can we be better as Muslims? How can we be better as an ummah? Imam Malik, rahimahullah ta'ala, he made it very clear that the end of this ummah will never be rectified until they follow that which the beginning of this ummah follows. And we look at the Sahaba and the early Muslims and how they used to focus on the seerah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Ali ibn Hussein radiyallahu an, he said that we used to learn the maghazi or the battles, the seerah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, like we learn the surah of the Quran. They will learn the seerah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam like they will learn the surah from the Quran, focusing on it. Abdullah ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma, who is from the greatest scholars of tafsir, they said he would focus and make specified time during his lessons to his students to teach them the seerah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And even they said sometimes he would get involved in speaking in depth in the seerah, and he would speak to us for the entire night just about the seerah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And Ismail ibn Muhammad ibn Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas radiallahu an, he said that my father used to teach us the seerah, the maghazi, the battles of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and he would repeat it time and time again. And he would say that this is the history of your forefathers, so do not lose it. And Imam al-Zuhri, he used to say that in the knowledge of the maghazi, the battles and the seerah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, is the knowledge of the dunya and the akhirah. Mentioning this, what we hope to gain from these lectures here tonight is not just to come and give you information that perhaps a lot of it you already have. But what we hope to gain from this conference is that we revive reading the seerah of our beloved Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in our household and in our lives, but we read it in a different fashion. We read it in a way, as the brother was mentioning earlier, in a way when we look at our lives. How is this relevant to the days we are living in? How do I benefit from this? How can I look at my life and look at what happened in the seerah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the seerah of the Sahaba radiallahu anhum and benefit from this and implementing this in my life? This is what we want to revive here tonight. Not just to give information, because a lot of times we read the seerah just for ma'lumat, to gather information, to know about the history, a little information, and to get some barakah, some blessings. But we need to see how can we act upon it. How can it affect our lives? How is it relevant to the days we're living in? And that brings us to the importance of the issue of studying history.
Absolutely. Jazakallah khair, AbdurRaheem. First of all, I want to say a big congratulations to the daughter of our sponsor, Ghazi al-Mana'i Anud, who mashallah graduated today or yesterday, alhamdulillah. And very interesting, she was studying political science, which involves a lot of reading about history. It's actually very, very important that we study this subject. And it's not for the reason of learning the dates of battles and the names of kings. And, a lot of history tends to be like these dates and these names. And that's not really what's important. History is very important because it's how we learn lessons for our own behavior. And there's a famous saying that goes that people who do not learn from the mistakes of their past are doomed to repeat them in the future. So one of the reasons we learn history is because history has lessons for us. History teaches us the story of human success and the story of human failure. And that's why you find many of the books of Seerah, they talk about the state of the world before the coming of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And one of the things that you find, brothers and sisters, is that history really does repeat itself. Because within the history of humanity is manifest or made known the sunnah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So one of the things that we find repeating itself again and again, and as Shk AbdurRaheem was saying, it's so relevant for us today. This is what is important. And both of us are going to be talking about that. Why is it so relevant for us today? So I just want to dwell very briefly upon the state of the world before the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And it's actually summarized by a hadith which is found in Sahih Muslim. And the hadith mentions that before the coming of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Allah looked upon the people of the world and hated them. Allah looked upon the people of the world and hated them, Arab and non-Arab, except a few remnants of the people of the book. And what is very important here is how we as Muslims understand and define civilization. Civilization, often when Westerners talk about being civilized, they mean clean toilets, nice motorways, amazing technology. This is what they refer to as being civilized. But for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in the sight of Allah, what is important for the human beings is that we single out Him alone for worship. And the deterioration of human beings and the deterioration of society and the world is when human beings distance themselves from Allah. And so this is what had happened. The world before the coming of the Prophet was a world of Jahiliyyah. It is a world of ignorance. And by ignorance, it doesn't mean that people didn't know how to read and write. It doesn't mean that people didn't know how to build roads and amazing buildings. In fact, they did a lot of that. But Jahiliyyah means they didn't know Allah. Even at the time, the religion, and this is what I want us to think about. How did the religion of Jesus, Isa alayhi salam, which was the religion of Tawheed, it was the religion of Islam. Jesus, Isa alayhi salam, preached Islam. He preached La ilaha illallah. Yet, before the coming of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Christianity itself had divided into many, many different sects and groups. And most of them believed in something that is clearly shirk. That Jesus is Allah, a partner with Allah. Claiming that He is the Son of Allah. Astaghfirullah. How did this happen? It's very important for us to understand. How does the religion become corrupted? Because when we understand how religion becomes corrupted, we take lessons for that, and we can guard and protect ourselves as Muslims from the same thing happening to our deen. And I'm sure AbdurRaheem is going to talk a little bit about the same thing, how the religion of Ibrahim became the worship of 360 idols. Anyway, the point that I want to make, brothers and sisters, is that this was the state of the world. The state of the world was Jahiliyyah. There were very, very few people. And if you remember the story of Salman al-Farsi, there were just a few people still upon the religion of Isa. If you remember Salman al-Farsi's teacher, he said, I don't know anyone left upon this matter, except such and such one in this city. And he sent him to that city, and then there was no one left. And the last of his teachers said, I don't know anyone left upon the original religion of Jesus. But there is a time that will come when a prophet will come, and his coming will shade you. Meaning you will find shade, you will find protection under his guidance. So this was the state of the world. There was really no one left, nothing left. And this is what happens. It goes through these cycles. And I actually believe in many ways we are going through another one of these cycles right now. We see the world in many ways returning to a state of corruption, where human beings are very, very distant from the knowledge and the true understanding of Islam as it was in the time of the Prophet ﷺ. So it is something that we should take a lesson from. So Shk AbdurRaheem, that's a bit about the state of the world very briefly. What was the state of Mecca, particularly in the time before the Prophet ﷺ?
If we look at the state of Mecca, and as you mentioned, originally the deen of Tawheed, of pure Islamic monotheism, what was there, the deen of Ibrahim. And then as Shaitan comes, and this is what we study the history, we studied the Seerah of all of the prophets, alayhim salam. You see with the people of Nuh, how did Shaitan eventually get it? And he was patient, tidrijiyan, gradually, he pulled them in. So the same thing with the people of Mecca. They started to drift away slowly from the religion of Ibrahim. And that's why when you look at our beloved Prophet ﷺ, in his khutbahs, when he would speak, he would always warn, and khutbah al-hajj, about the dangers of bid'ah, of innovating into the religion. Because once you start to innovate and you start to change into the religion, that's when Shaitan gets you. He gets you on the small things first, and then he gets you to the major things to fall into shirk. And that's what happened to the people of Mecca. And as we mentioned in the beginning, what is relevant is not just to look at as historical facts, this is how they were, but we need to reflect on the days that we live in as well. And as you mentioned, this cycle that's coming back, and that we're going to be a full-blown Jahiliyyah ever again. After the Prophet ﷺ was sent, and as he said, he made it clear, ﷺ, there will always be a ta'ifa, there will always be a group who are holding on to the haqq, even if they're small in numbers. So there'll never be a pure Jahiliyyah, meaning the time of it. But he said there could be certain areas, certain locations, where you find the people, they go back into forms of Jahiliyyah. And many of the practices which we see around the Muslim worlds today, they are very similar to what we see from the people of Mecca before the time of the Prophet ﷺ, which is a reminder to us of the importance of reviving our ummah and taking our ummah back to the core of the Tawheed and worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as one. If you look, for example, the ibadat, the worships that we have around the world today, many of the acts of shirk that the people of Mecca, and this is very important because the Quran makes it clear. There's no doubt about it in the Quran. However, what do we gain when we add the seerah to the Quran? The implementation. We see the implementation from the Prophet ﷺ and his understanding, and the implementation of the Sahaba and their understanding to the Quran. When you look at the Islam, why Islam is clear. And what happens here, Allah made it clear in the Quran. And when you look into the seerah, you see the implementation of the Sahaba. You see the implementation of the Rasul ﷺ when it comes to not following and blind following the forefathers. Allah mentions in the Quran, مَا وَجَدْنَا عَلَيْهِ آبَانَا, what we found our forefathers upon. And many people today have gone astray by following that path, by following a customary Islam where they saw their forefathers doing something, so they followed the path. But if we were to go back to the Quran and go back to the seerah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we would see the implementation and how the Sahaba, they stood firm, even against their own family members. And you see the beautiful story of Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, when he showed us the most important thing to us as Muslims is what? La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. It doesn't matter about the issue, the family, what people will say. We're always concerned what others are going to say. What are the people going to say about me if I practice my deen? The Arabs, by the way, this is important, this story, if you look at it, the story of Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas with his mother. Because the Arabs, if you look, and we look into the books of history, they always paint the bad things that they had, which they had a lot of horrible things, that's true. But they had good qualities as well. Some of the family ties they had, being generous to their guests, some of the manners and morals they had, some of these things were actually very good. So they did have some good things as well. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ said, إِنَّمَا بُعِثْتُ لِيُتِمِّمْ مَكَارِمَ الْأَخْلَاقِ. I was sent to perfect good manners. The good manners that they had, to perfect it and take it to another level. So if you look at the story of Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, when his mother knew that if he were to harm her, he would look bad in the eyes of the people. And she said, I'm not going to eat, I'm not going to drink until you leave the religion of Muhammad. And if you don't, then I'm going to die, and the people are going to call Qatil Ummihi, the one who was the killer of his mother. So his reputation now is ruined. Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, as he looked at his mother getting weaker, she's fragile, she's old anyways. And then he said something to her, which is a lesson. This is what we gain, we go back to the seerah. When we're facing difficulties, I'm a Muslim, I want to come and practice my deen. I want to return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I see the implementation in the seerah. Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas radiallahu anhu, he said, Ya Ummah, my dear mother, he said, because she was about to die, he said, if you had in your body 100 souls, not one, 100 souls, and they were to come out one after the other, for me to leave the religion of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, I wouldn't leave it. This is the stance of Iman, the implementation of La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. This is what we gain. We go back to the Seerah, and we talk about making it relevant to our lives. This is, and we come to implement. We face situations like this. I remember a sister, may Allah bless her, her husband was in court for an issue. This is in America. And she was somebody who was practicing her deen, mashallah. She went into the court with her full niqab. Now, the prosecutor, he had a hatred towards Islam and the Muslims. So he's like, how can we see her face? How can we see her facial expressions? You know, he wants her to uncover her face anyway. So what did she say? His name was David. She said, yeah, Dave. She said, if I had 100 souls in my body, she took the lesson from the Seerah. Yeah. She said, if I had 100 souls in my body, and it were to come out one after the other for me to uncover my face, I wouldn't do it. Right away, respect from the people, the judge and everyone else, because they knew she had principles. And this is what we gain when we go back to the Seerah.
I think one of the things that really impacts me when I look at the society that existed in Mecca in the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I mean, okay, the Arabs had some good qualities, but all people all over the world have some good qualities, right? I mean, I really think that Allah chose that nation because they were probably one of the worst on the planet. And actually, all of our Arab brothers need to understand this. Without Islam, if you want to see how low human beings were without the deen of Islam, look at Jahiliyyah, look at the Arabian Peninsula before. They buried their daughters alive. They took them into the desert and buried them alive. They made tawaf around the Kaaba naked. They were addicted to alcohol. Their poems were about war, intertribal feuds, drinking alcohol, alhamdulillah. And I think what is so powerful is that it's almost as if Allah is showing us how Islam can transform people from the most terrible state. Never imagine that however bad a person is, Islam can change them. And this is the people to whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent this truly remarkable human being, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So Allah is showing us the transformative power of Islam. And this is the challenge that was given to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And what you're saying to me reminds me of this hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Islam began as something strange, and it will return as something strange. So glad tiding to the strangers. So I think, maybe as you were saying, we're living in a time when, exactly as you said, the full-blown Jahiliyyah will never return, alhamdulillah. But as the Prophet said, Islam began as a strange thing, and it's going to come. And today the Sunnah is, I remember when I first became Muslim, the Sunnah is strange. The Sunnah is strange amongst the Muslims. And I think this is the time that we find ourselves in. But we take inspiration from what the Prophet himself, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, had to face by, looking at that crazy state that the people were in before the coming of Islam.
Something amazing that Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anh, he reminded the Arab and the Muslims of. And because at that time, they were one of the only nations that wasn't ruled by any of the superpowers. They weren't ruled by the Romans or the Persians. Yeah. Nobody wanted them. Nobody wanted their country.
It was in the middle of nowhere.
In the middle of nowhere, hot desert. They don't have anything valuable. So they were just left basically alone. Yeah. And that's actually one of the benefits of choosing this location for the last revelation, because they were far away from the other civilizations, and it was easier, obviously, to spread the truth in a society like that. But something interesting that Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu used to say, نحن قوم أعزنا الله بالإسلام, that we are a nation that Allah has honored us through Islam. فلما ابتغينا العزة في غيره أذلنا الله. And when we search for honor in other than Islam, Allah humiliates us. And we look at the situation of the Ummah today, and we look at the situation of the Ummah before. Whenever the Ummah had majd and honor and glory, you'll see it was when they were holding firm to the deen. In all aspects. We're talking about the aspects of the deen and the aspects of the dunya, the worldly affairs as well. When the Muslims excelled and properly excelled. Okay, because once again, issue of civilization. What is civilization? And what is real, when we talk about taqaddum and being someone who is successful in this life, many things we see when we come to a Muslim country, like here in Qatar, for example. One of the example I gave recently, I saw a group of motorcycle riders.
Yeah.
And once they stopped to go and pray Dhuhr, mashallah, and have lunch, they left their helmets and they had these very expensive leather jackets.
Yeah.
They put onto they put onto their bikes and they went in. And I did a video of it. I said, imagine if we were in London or in the UK, we talk about this is the most civilized place. Yeah. And we always, they boast about being the most civilized. But they don't have this blessing of amin, of safety. And this is something obviously that comes from Islam, from the teachings of Islam. So alhamdulillah, we have to, we go back and we look into the seerah and we look at the situation to make it relevant. This is what we want to gain from tonight, from this, is to go back and when we actually benefit from our Islam, benefit from the seerah, it's not like something we say we're going to gather tonight and we're going to read about the seerah, about the Prophet ﷺ. It's reading it and acting upon it, implementing it, and making him the qudwa. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He told us in the Quran, وَلَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ, that you have the beautiful example in Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. This is how we know this uswa, how we know this role model, by going back to the seerah and then acting upon it. Are we out of time?
So I don't know how long we're supposed to.
Alhamdulillah. Can we finish?
Barakallahu feek.
We had to stop because if it's always a thing. If you give someone like us a microphone, we can go into al-fajr. So we know, inshallah, that there's another speaker, and we don't have any time in front of us. But
really good. So,
no bismillah, problem. We can continue. You can sit down, brother. We'll go.
Now, inshallah, we'll hear from the two sheikhs tomorrow, and they'll be covering off the Prophet ﷺ's emigration to Medina, to the actual hijrah. Jazakallah khair. Thank you very much. That was most enlightening.